Welcome grade 10 learners to another life science lesson. Today we are going to concentrate more on the ecosystem and on the environment. Now, the last session we did biospheres. Now, if you can remember, I just want to do a quick recap about the biospheres. Now, remember the word bio comes from the word living. So what we have there is all our living organisms interacting with our non-living environment, and that includes three things. If you can remember, if I just put down again L, H, and A. Yes, let's say lithosphere, and that refers to land. Remember that L is for land. The H is for hydrosphere. Okay, and the H is for H2O, which is water. A is atmosphere. Now remember, the A stands for air. So what we did on the biosphere is we looked at all the living organisms and how they interact with their non-living environment, which is air, water, and land. Now today we're going to look at a smaller biosphere, which is called an ecosystem. So we're going to concentrate on the ecosystem and the environment. All right, let's move on from here. So we're going straight on to what we are going to discuss today. So the key concepts for this session is going to be, like I said, the environment. All right, we'll come back to that. We're going to look at abiotic factors. Now, I have explained yesterday what abiotic stands for, and I would like you to think about it. Abiotic, the little letter A, tells me it's non-living. Well done. And then biotic are our biotic living factors. We're going to look at energy flow. That's a flow of energy, obviously, through our trophic levels. And trophic, as we're going to see later on, refers to feeding levels, the different feeding levels in our ecosystem. That's going to bring us to a few different, to a few cycles. It's going to include the water cycle, the oxygen cycle, the carbon cycle, and the nitrogen cycle. And then we're going to have a little chat about ecotourism. So those are our different categories of what we're going to discuss today. That brings us straight on to the word environment. Now, what is the environment? Now, an environment is, another word for environment is habitat. So what is habitat? Habitat is a place that you live in, or that an organism lives in. So it's the home of an organism. All right, so it's the natural environment which encompasses. Now the word encompasses really means, let's replace that word with a word like includes. All right, so it includes all living, as we said now, biotic, and all the non-living, which is abiotic things occurring naturally on Earth. So that is my environment. So it encompasses the interaction of all living species. Now you see that big word, symbiosis. Now you can say, I have never heard of this word maybe before, or maybe you have heard of that word before. Now what does it mean? I'm going to just explain to you very briefly what the word symbiosis means. Now symbiosis means the living together of two organisms. Now when two organisms live together, they interact with each other. They can either be like parasitism, where the one harms the other one, or it can be like mutualism, where both benefit from each other, or it could be commensalism, where the one organism benefits and the other one is completely unharmed. But I'm not going to discuss those different symbiotic relationships. I just want you to know that what it means, what the word symbiosis means. All right. And like I said now, the natural environment is often used as a synonym for the word habitat, which means it's the same word as the word habitat. So those two words, environment and habitat, is very similar. Now what is very important today that we are going to look at, and that is, like, we know it's the environment, but we're going to look at the following We're going to look at how do humans have an impact on our environment. Now, just to stand still at this little word, humans. Now, we know that the human population has increased tremendously over the last few hundred years. I think there's about, I would say, around about 7 billion people on Earth. Wow, that's so many. Now, the scientists say that this one Earth that we live on cannot sustain 7 billion people. We actually need 2 other Earths, the equal size of this Earth, to sustain 7 billion people. So we are harming this one Earth, and we need 2 more Earths to sustain life. That is quite scary. Right, now how do humans have an impact on the environment? We're going to look at the ozone depletion. We're going to look at the greenhouse effect. In other words, how do humans have an impact on the greenhouse, on the Earth? We're going to look at the impact we have on global warming, deforestation, acid rain, and the destruction of our biodiversity. So I'm going to discuss each one of these briefly. So let's move on to the first one, ozone depletion. Now, I'm sure you've heard of this word so many times. Oh, there's a hole in the ozone layer. Now, what is ozone? Now, ozone is our good oxygen. That's a good way of explaining it. It is good oxygen. So we have a layer of good oxygen around the Earth, and that layer now is preventing all these harmful rays, these harmful UV rays that come from the sun. It's protecting us. It's protecting us from skin cancers. Now, as we know, that the word depletion means something is now depleting this oxygen. It's making that layer thinner and thinner. That's what we say, there's a hole. It makes the layer thinner and thinner. So what's the problem now is that the UV rays, which is the bad sun rays, are coming through from the sun. It penetrates this thin layer of ozone, and it now damages Earth. It damages the humans, it damages our skins, it damages our plants, and it has a great bad effect on our ecosystem. All right, let's move on to the greenhouse effect. Now, the greenhouse effect, global warming, ozone depletion, that's all linked. Now, remember what we're looking at is the human impact, the negative impact that the humans have on our planet Earth. We're going to look at, okay, now I've already now explained to you the greenhouse effect about the UV rays. So what happens here now, like I said, the UV rays penetrate that ozone layer. Now, the big problem is that we have pollution. So we have all these greenhouse gases. Now, what is a greenhouse gas? Greenhouse gas is a gas that's formed from our exhaust fumes, from cars, from factories, from burning fossil fuels. So all those bad gases, especially carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, methane gases, sulfur dioxide, all of those are called greenhouse gases. Now, those gases surround our planet Earth. It forms like a blanket. Now, when the sun rays come through that thin ozone layer, the sun rays, the radiation needs to be reflected back into the atmosphere. Instead of that, the heat is building up under this blanket of gases, and that is now slowly warming up this Earth in which we live. And what do you think that warming up is going to do? That warming up of the Earth is going to damage, again, the plants, the crops that we grow. It's going to affect, the sea levels are going to rise. So it's going to have such a huge impact on our ecosystem. It's going to have a bad effect on our plants and animals. All right, I didn't write much here about the greenhouse effect, but I've explained it nicely, I think. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. Let's look at global warming. Now, like I said, global warming is linked to the greenhouse effect. It's linked to the ozone depletion. Now, scientists say that in a few years' time, our temperature on Earth is going to be risen by about 2 to 5 degrees Celsius. So in a few years' time, around about 2030, they say that our temperature is going to be about 2 to 5 degrees warmer. Now you're going to say, oh, that's not going to have an effect. It's not that much. Yes, it is a huge increase in temperature if you look at what the temperature should be around about, let's say 30 degrees. Now, if the temperature is going to be a consistent 35 degrees, can you imagine what effect it will have on our plant and animal life? Right, we're moving now on to deforestation. Deforestation. Let me change to a green pen because that now represents our forest and our green plants. Now let's just take that word D away and look at forestation. Now forestation means the planting of our forests, the planting of trees. So obviously D means we take it away. So deforestation means it's the natural or the removal, all right, of natural forests. Now, why would people do that? Why would people remove our trees? There are various reasons why people remove trees. Now, you can think for yourself. People need wood. They need timber to build houses, to make furniture, to sell, to make money. Okay, so we can say that they need wood. All right, they need wood to make furniture. They need wood to burn, to cook their food and to keep warm. Right, they clear land. They clear land for what? They clear land to build roads, to build better offices, housing. So by removing our forests, this is for humans. So we're looking at the human impact on our environment. Remember that. All right. Another, like I said now, they also need firewood to cook and to keep warm and so on. All right. Now we were saying now deforestation now, where the people remove the trees, they remove the forests, and that is all for making fire, using the wood to make furniture. Now, what are the consequences? The consequences, meaning what is the problem now? What is it causing? Now, the consequences are things like it changes the composition of our atmosphere. Now, what does that mean? It means that, okay, so it has an effect on our atmosphere. It changes the composition of the gas in the air. In other words, there's going to be, because trees absorb carbon dioxide, all right, remember, for photosynthesis, and it releases oxygen back into the air. Now that balance is going to be out of balance now. So it's going to affect the composition of the level of carbon dioxide and the level of oxygen in the air when the trees are removed. It also causes soil erosion. So when you remove the trees, erosion is that it's going to cause the soil so when it rains, all the topsoil, the good soil will be removed, and all our good minerals will be depleted, and our soil is going to become poor in nutrients. Another very important one is habitats. If we remove the forest, we remove the habitat of so many living organisms. Birds that live there, rabbits, you name it. All those beautiful animals that live there will not have a place to stay. All right, that brings us to the word acid rain. Now, I'm sure you've heard of this before. Now, maybe I should just look at the word acid. Now, what does the word acid mean? Now, I'm sure you know that if your dad put acid in the pool, it will kill all the algae that grow there, so you have beautiful blue water to swim in. Now, acid in rainwater is not such a good thing. Now, we measure acidity, as pH. Right, this you do more in science, but pH of rainwater is around about 5.6. Now, that's slightly acidic. So rainwater is not neutral, not alkaline, so it's slightly acidic. Now, what happens here is that when we have greenhouse gases, now I mentioned a few greenhouse gases before. Greenhouse gases, for example, the most important one is CO2. We have methane gas. sulfur oxide, all those gases. All right. Now those gases, when it's released into the atmosphere. Now it goes into the clouds, and there's a chemical reaction taking place there between these gases and the water in those clouds. And because of that chemical reaction, it causes that water to become more acidic. So the pH is lowered to, let's say, around about 4. Now that is not good, because what's going to happen is that when this rainwater now comes back to Earth, and we call that precipitation. We're going to do that in the water cycle. Is when it rains or hails or there's dew, the water comes back to the Earth's surface. Right, so the water will land in our streams, it will land on our Earth's surface, it will go into our dams, causing that water to become more acidic. Now what's going to happen? That acidity is going to affect, once again, the plants and the animals. It's poison. It's poison for these animals and these plants. So we are killing the plants and the animals. So once again, it's the human impact on the environment. We are the cause of greenhouse gases, and that will affect the rainwater, making it acidic, affecting the plants and the animals. Right. Now, all of these that I've mentioned acid rain, deforestation, what else did we do? Deforestation we mentioned. All of that, all of those impacts of the humans will distract our biodiversity. Now, let's see if you can remember the word bio. Remember, it comes from living. All right, like biosphere refers to living. And what does the term diversity mean? Now, diversity means a large variety. Okay, so we refer here to a large variety of living plant and animal organisms. So, what's happening here? Because of all these factors we mentioned, like acid rain, deforestation, it distracts our plant and animal life, and therefore we are distracting the biodiversity. All right, even what can happen here is that it can all lead to extinction of our plants and animals, and we have to look after it. Okay, that brings us now to the term ecosystem. We were talking about the environment, and now we're going to look at more detail of the ecosystems. Now, what is an ecosystem? Now, when I started this session, I said, remember we did biosphere. Now, the biosphere is the big Earth. So when we look down onto the big Earth, we look down onto our water, which is the hydrosphere, the land, lithosphere, and then that thin layer of air around the Earth, that's the atmosphere. Now, what is an ecosystem? All right. Now, an ecosystem, you can also say an ecosystem is an environment because it's a habitat. See, all these words are related. Ecosystem, habitat, environment, because it is a natural unit. All right. Now, a biosphere was also a unit, but a biome was also a large unit. Now, an ecosystem is a smaller unit. So what was a biome? Remember, a biome was a place, a large area on Earth with its own climate, its own plant, and its own animal life. Now, if you break that biome down into a little biome, that is an ecosystem. All right, so an ecosystem is where we have its own plants, there's animals, there are always little microorganisms. Now remember the word biotic. Plants and animals and microorganisms are living. So it's biotic, and they live in an area. Okay, I'm coming back to that with symbiosis, with all the non-living. Now, symbiosis means interaction. So there's an interaction between, or the living together between the biotic, which is your plants, animals, and microorganisms, together with the non-living physical or abiotic factors of that environment. And now remember, that is land, which is our lithosphere, air, atmosphere, and water. So, an ecosystem is a small unit, where biome is a big unit, small unit with plants, its own animals, its small microorganisms, and it interacts with the physical environment, which is land, water, and soil. Land, water, soil, and air. All right. Okay. The word biotic, just quickly to revise, it means it's related to life. The word biotic, bio is life. So it's living factors. I don't know how many times we said this before, but biotic is living organisms, which is plants, animals, fungi, protists, and bacteria. These are all examples of living little organisms and animals and plants on Earth. The word abiotic, remember, if we put the little a in front of biotic, biotic is living, a makes it non. So the term a refers to, or the letter a refers to the term non. Non-living means not alive, non-living. And that affects the living organisms. Now, if I take a little ecosystem like a fish tank, a simple fish tank. Now, in that fish tank, we have abiotic factors. Water, we have gravel or soil, we have oxygen, there must be light. Now, all of those factors will affect the little fish that swim in that fish pond. It will affect the plants. There must be harmony between all these abiotic factors. And if there's harmony with the abiotic factors, the biotic factors will be happy, and they will live in harmony together. So you can see there's interaction going on. If you take one of the components away, let's say we take away sunlight, what effect will it have on that ecosystem? If you take sunlight away, immediately your plants are going to stop making food. It's going to stop making oxygen, and that's going to affect the living organisms. The fish won't have food to eat, the fish won't have oxygen to breathe. So there's an interaction between living and non-living components inside this ecosystem. Right, let's move on to ecosystems. As I was, we're still busy with ecosystems. I think before we're going to move on to this huge nitrogen cycle, I think we need a quick break, and let's go and have a sip of cold drink or go stretch, and I'll be back soon. Welcome back, grade 10 learners. We have now done quite a bit, and we're going to go on to some hectic stuff, which is going to be on the different cycles. And I know that the grade 10 learners are always nervous when they do this. They say, I can't do the nitrogen cycle, but I'm going to try and explain it to you so it make it a bit easier. Right, so like I said, now we're going to look at a few nutrient cycles. Now, this word biogeochemical, it's a long word, but I'm going to break it down and make it a bit easier for you. Bio comes from the word, yes, life. The word geo, remember geo, anything that geo is going to do with land or it's going to do with earth, right? And then chemicals, chemical cycling of things like water. So we're going to see water as a chemical because it's H2O. We're going to look at oxygen. We're going to look at the carbon cycle, the carbon dioxide. We're going to look at nitrogen. So those are the chemicals we're talking about. So if you go back now to the word biogeochemical, all right, so it's an interaction and a recycling of these non-living components and the living animals and plants on Earth. All right, so that's what we're going to look at. And we're going to start off with the nitrogen cycle. Now, when we breathe in air, we breathe in various gas. We breathe in oxygen gas, we breathe in carbon dioxide gas, we breathe in nitrogen gas. We also breathe in all sorts of particles in the air. Now, the oxygen can go from your lungs into your blood, and your cells can use that oxygen directly. Now, a gas that's very important to us is nitrogen. Into nitrogen. Now this nitrogen appears as a gas in the atmosphere, so we call it nitrogen or atmospheric nitrogen. Now we need nitrogen. Now what do we need nitrogen for? Now if you can maybe remember along the line somewhere you were talking about proteins and amino acids. Now nitrogen is a component of amino acids, and amino acids are needed to build proteins, and proteins are needed to build muscle tissue. It's needed to build cell membranes. It's part of your protoplasm in your cells. So proteins form a very, very important substance of your entire body. Now, we can't breathe in nitrogen. Yes, we can inhale it, but we exhale it. We exhale the same amount as we have breathed in. Now, where do we get our nitrogen to build our proteins? So let's look at this nitrogen cycle now. All right, we start off with nitrogen cycle, nitrogen in the atmosphere. Now that nitrogen goes into the soil. It dissolves in the soil. Another way of nitrogen getting into the soil, it's very interesting, is whenever there's lightning and the lightning strikes Earth, somehow that lightning, when it strikes the Earth, that nitrogen gets incorporated into the soil. It's actually amazing. Right, now the nitrogen goes into the soil. Now what happens to that nitrogen? Inside the soil we have tiny bacteria. Now this is where bacteria plays such a big role in our lives. Now inside the soil we have nitrogen fixing bacteria. Now the word says what it does. It fixes nitrogen. It changes nitrogen into another form. So it's a whole chemical process. Don't worry, we're not going to look at too much of the chemical side of this. All right? So we have nitrogen fixing bacteria. Now this nitrogen fixing bacteria appears either freely in the soil, or it can appear on the roots inside little nodules. It's little bumps on roots of especially your legume plants. Now legume plants are things like pea plants or bean plants. So it's very, very important for you to eat your green vegetables, your dark green vegetables. All right. Okay, so now the nitrogen fixing bacteria fixes the nitrogen and changes it or converts it into another form. So if we look down here, it changes the N2 nitrogen into ammonia. Now, like I said, we're not going to look too much about that chemical side, but you can see there's a change taking place. Nitrogen was N2, and now there's some hydrogens added to this. But don't worry, they'll never ask you about what's in the bracket there. All right, so it changes into ammonia. So the nitrogen is now in a different form, in a different chemical form, ammonia. Now what happens? There's another group of bacteria called nitrifying and nitrifying bacteria. The process is called nitrification. So what happens here is that the ammonia once again is converted into another form, into another chemical form, and that's now called nitrites. All right? Nitrites, you can see there's a bit of oxygen now added. Right. From here, the nitrites is now going to be changed to another form. Can you see this whole conversion taking place of nitrogen gas? So the gas is being changed to ammonia, to nitrites. Now it's going to be changed into another form, and that's very important. It's going to be changed into nitrates. Now I said there's another group of bacteria, and that's called nitrifying bacteria. So you can see now we have different groups of bacteria doing different conversions of the nitrogen. Now, what's important is that we can actually call this, plant food. Now you can give your plants nitrates. You can go to a nursery, you can buy plant food in a container, or these days they sell little green sticks, and if you read on the packaging, it says nitrates. That's plant food. So you can give that to your plants, and your plants will be beautiful. So nitrates is plant food. So what happens here now? Plants will absorb, that word assimilation means absorb. So the plants will absorb it through their roots. So plant roots cannot absorb the nitrogen gas, but it can absorb the nitrates. So what happened? The bacteria changed the gas, nitrogen gas, into nitrates. So it's more organic now. And now the plants can absorb that organic nitrates. And what do the plants now do with these nitrates, do you think? Plants use that nitrates to make their own plant proteins. They make their own plant proteins. Now, look at this little animal. That animal is going to eat the plants. So guess what? The animal, that little mouse, is going to use the plant protein to make its own protein, to make its own little muscles, to make its own little cell membranes, and to be a component of the protoplasm. Now, when that little animal is going to die, when the plants are going to die, there are decomposers in our soil, very important living organisms, fungi, bacteria, that's going to decay and break down the dead organic matter. Now that dead organic matter is going to return back into ammonia. And this whole cycle is going to be repeated. Now guys, just looking at this, I mean, it's just the most amazing process taking place inside our soil. And you and I, we don't think about this every day, but look how important it is so that we can get the nitrogen from the atmosphere in a different form, because nitrogen is so important to build amino acids and to build proteins in our bodies. I hope you understand the nitrogen cycle now a little bit more. Let's move on to the water cycle. Now I think this cycle is the easiest of them all. And I really want you to think about, if you look at, just if you go outside and you go stand there and you can picturize what I'm going to try and tell you here. Now, we start off with the sun. Now the sun is causing evaporation to take place, right? Evaporation. So what's happening here is that the water in our oceans, the water in the dams, in our lakes, all of that water is going to evaporate because of the heat of the sun. Also, evaporation is going to take place through transpiration. Now, what is transpiration again? It's when plant leaves give off water in the form of water vapor. So that vapor goes into the air. You can't see it, but we know that there's vapor coming off. If you boil a kettle, you can actually see the steam. Very similar, that's water vapor. All right. Now, as soon as we have all this vapor in the air, that vapor now is going to condense. We call it condensation. So to give you an example, when you boil that kettle and you see the steam coming off, and you hold like a cold, like a plate, you'll see later on the little water droplets forming on that plate. That is condensation. That's when the gas form of water changes into a liquid form. Now that is how clouds are forming, all right? So the clouds is a form of water storage. So all our water gets stored in the form of clouds, and from there it can form ice, it can form snow, especially now in winter. We don't look forward to the snow and the cold. Right, now, from here we're going to have precipitation, which is when it rains. That means it's when water comes back to the earth in the form of rain, hail, like we said, snow, mist, dew. All of those forms are forms of precipitation. So what happens? All this water comes back to earth. Can you see why we call this cycle? There's a cycle, there's a recycling of water. This is what's so wonderful. The water comes back to the earth and it goes back into the atmosphere. So there's a recycling of water from the atmosphere onto the hydrosphere, onto the lithosphere, and going back into the atmosphere. All right, so just to finish this off, the water now is going to run down. It's going to go down infiltrate into the soil, it becomes part of the groundwater, and it runs down. It can go into the oceans, or it can form springs, or it can form streams and dams and rivers and lakes. And that's where all our fresh water is being stored, is in the form of these beautiful springs and dams and that. All right, and then the whole cycle will start all over again through the process of evaporation. All right, that is, I hope you understand the water cycle. Let's now move on to the carbon cycle. All right, now carbon dioxide and oxygen. These are two cycles that go together. Right, let's start with, let's change maybe to all right. Okay, now our plants, let's start with the plants. What do plants do? Now plants photosynthesize. Now let's look at maybe at that word again. Oopsie, let's go to another color. Maybe pink is a good color, I think. Pink stands out. Right, plants photosynthesize. Let's just write with photosynthesis. Remember, photosynthesis, photo means light, all right? So the plant needs sunlight. Synthesis means producing or making. So what do plants do? They make food or produce food in the presence of sunlight. Right, now while they're making food, they have to absorb carbon dioxide. So what the plant is going to do, they're going to take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Now, like we said earlier on, deforestation. Deforestation means that you cut out all those trees, those beautiful trees. Now, what's going to happen to the balance of the atmospheric gases is that you're going to have now less carbon dioxide being absorbed by the plants. So what's going to happen, that the carbon dioxide level will rise, and that is a greenhouse gas, which is going to lead to more greenhouse gases forming a bigger blanket around the earth, and that contributes towards the greenhouse effect, global warming, and causing a huge effect on our plants and animals. So plants are very important in maintaining that balance of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Right? What else happens during this carbon cycle is that our factories, cars, they all give off carbon dioxide. So the more cars there are, the more factories there are burning fossil fuels, the more carbon dioxide goes into the atmosphere. But thank goodness for the trees, because the trees will absorb that carbon dioxide and try and maintain the balance. All right, so now there's a recycling. So what's going to happen? All the carbon dioxide goes into the oceans. I'm not going to go through all this detail, what happens in the ocean, but the ocean forms such a lot, our marine habitat, our rivers, lakes. There's a recycling of carbon dioxide taking place. There are also little plants in algae in the water that's going to absorb that carbon dioxide and for photosynthesis. All right, so the point here is that there's a cycle of carbon dioxide between the hydrosphere, lithosphere, and the atmosphere. There's a continuous cycling taking place of carbon dioxide. All right, I'm not going to go into more detail than just that, what you need to know. Okay, now the oxygen cycle actually links up with the carbon dioxide. All right, here's the word photosynthesis. Photosynthesis referred to the trees producing food, synthesis, produce food in the presence of light. And what happens now is that oxygen is given off. All right, so that's where you and I get our oxygen from. So when we breathe, inhale air, that oxygen comes from the process of photosynthesis in the trees. Now, again, like I said, now there's the carbon dioxide and the oxygen cycle is like it's joined together. You can't separate the two actually from each other. So there's a cycling of oxygen coming from, like I said, from this will be the lithosphere. Okay, so we have trees growing on Earth. All right, so we have oxygen coming from the lithosphere. That oxygen gets recycled between, oh, there's lithosphere, there's our land. All right, so we have oxygen coming from our lithosphere. That oxygen is going to go back into the hydrosphere, which is water, and it's going to go back into the atmosphere. So there's a continuous cycle of this oxygen. All right, just quickly that word biosphere. All right, biosphere includes, again, the lithosphere, which is land. It includes the hydrosphere, which is water, and then obviously the atmosphere, which is air. So with the oxygen cycle, there's a continuous cycling of our oxygen taking place. All right, I think that is enough there. I think let's do ecosystems. We're still busy with ecosystems, but I think let's look at the energy flow of our nutrients, energy flow and nutrient cycle. I'm going to change now to my favorite color, green. All right, we're going to look now at energy flow and nutrient cycles. Now I think we've covered nutrient cycles. I think this is what we've done. The recycling of nutrients is oxygen and water and carbon dioxide. All right. The two major functions that takes place in an ecosystem. Remember, we're talking about recycling. We're talking about all these cycles of water, oxygen, and the interaction going on. But a very important function is the transfer of energy. We're going to look at that in this little section. And the recycling, like I said, we have covered the recycling of nutrients already. Okay, so we're moving now on to the energy flow. Now, what is energy flow? Now, energy, like we said, is produced by what? It's produced by photosynthesis. Don't think I need to explain that word to you again. Maybe you should say to yourself, what does the word mean? If you break down the word photo, light, synthesis, produce. So it's a production of food in the presence of light, and that's what green plants can do. Now, the energy that's produced by the plants. Now, whenever you eat an apple, let's say you eat an apple, I always say that in that apple is the energy from the sun. So the radiant energy of the sun is converted during photosynthesis, and that's captured inside that apple in the form of chemical energy. So there was a flow of energy from the sun into that apple. All right, so that's been produced. I eat the apple, so the energy now is transferred from the apple into my body. So that's what we mean by transfer of energy, or energy being produced and then being transferred. Right, so the energy produced by photosynthesis will be passed through the food chains. Okay, so it goes from the tree, from the apple, to the consumer, the next consumer, so the energy will be transferred throughout the food chain and the food web. We're going to look at these two a little bit later. Now, what happens to this energy? Now, I'm using this apple as an example because it's a good example. Now, what happens if I eat that apple? I'm going to run and jump and talk. My cells will work, my heart is beating, my lungs are working, my muscles are working. All of these organs use up energy. Oh yes, my brain is working and it uses up the energy. So that's what we mean by lost. It's not really, okay, it's lost in the form of heat. So the heat that comes out my skin, that's a form of energy that gets lost. But the energy is getting less. So from the apple, the energy that I got from the apple by eating it, the energy, I have used some of that energy. My skin have radiated some of the energy out in the form of heat. So that's what we mean by it gets lost. Energy is lost at each level, like I said now. So we're going to look at that when we get to the flow of energy through the food chain. I'm going to give you a bit more detail when we get to that. Now, as a result of the loss of energy at each transfer between these levels. Now I'm going to get to the word trophic a bit later on, but trophic means feeding level. Now, an example is the tree, the apple tree that I'm talking about, is at the first feeding level. I'm the second feeding level. That's what we mean. There's a transfer from the apple tree, the first feeding level, onto the second feeding level. All right, so as a result of the loss of energy at each level, between ecosystems are usually limited to 3 or 4 levels. Now, the shorter a food chain is, the better, the more energy there is available in that chain. The longer the food chain, the energy gets lost at each level, so the energy is just getting less and less and less. Okay, now the last sentence says here, the actual number, that's not the number of the links in the food chain, all right, of the levels. The actual number will depend upon the size of the initial there's a new word, which is a producer. Now, the word autotrophic, maybe you can remember the word autotrophic, okay? Trophic comes from feeding, so it's a feeding level. Now, what's auto? Auto means self. If you think of an automatic car, the car, your dad doesn't have to change the gears, the car changes the gears by itself. Okay, so auto means self. So, plants are autotrophic, which means they are producers. They produce their own food by the process of photosynthesis. All right, each time get lost here, but the actual number will depend upon the size of the initial produced biomass. So it depends on how many plants are available. The living mass, how much food as plant food was available, and the efficiency of energy transfer between the trophic levels. Okay, I just want you to read that sentence once again so it makes sense to you. It says the actual number will depend upon the size of the initial amount, which is biomass, and the efficiency of the energy being transferred between the trophic levels. All right. That brings us now to the different trophic levels. Now remember the word, let's change color, let's go to orange. Right, the word trophic, each time when you hear the word trophic, just replace it with the word feeding. So each time you think trophic, okay, feeding, and then it will just be easier to remember. So it says that trophic or feeding level of an organism is the position it's the position it holds in a food chain and depends on how much energy it consumes or produces. Now, let's say, for example, I had the tree, all right? So there's a tree, that's the first trophic level. So that position in the food chain is first. So we're going to call that the first trophic level or first feeding level. From there on, we're going to have the first consumer. Now we're going to talk later on about the herbivores, but the first consumer is the first level of feeding. So that is our first trophic level. And then we're going to move on to the second trophic level. So that's the position that it holds in a food chain. Right, so like we said now, the trophic level of each organism can be drawn as a pyramid. Right. Now I think later on we're going to, let me extend this page and just explain to you very briefly what a pyramid is. Now let's say I take that same food chain now of the apple tree. So I'm going to, let's quickly redraw that. So there's a leaf, and now I have a first, so I have a first consumer. Sorry, the first level. And the second level. I'm just going to use these words for now. Okay, so instead of writing it like a food chain there, I can put that into a pyramid formation like that. So I'm taking that chain and I'm just writing it now into a different format, which is a pyramid formation. So at the bottom we'll have the producers. So I'm going to put my little leaf there. That is the first, well, that is the, so if I say first level, I meant there the first level of consumers. All right. And that's the second level of consumers. Okay, so this is our first level of producers. Okay, so we're going to have on the first trophic level, I'll explain this to you a bit later, but there, that leaf is now on our first level. Then we're going to have the first consumer on that level and the second consumer on the next level. That's what we mean by a pyramid. Now, I'm going to explain to you a bit more detail on pyramids later. All right. Okay. This brings us now to, like I said, the more detail about trophic level. So what is a trophic level? Trophic level, again, is a feeding level. The first feeding level, not the consumers. The first level is the producers, because they can make their own food. What is a producer? It's a green plant. All right, so it's a green plant that can produce its own food by a process of photosynthesis. And we're going to say that green plants or producers are also remember that word, autotrophic, which means self-feeders. So on our first level in the food chain, not the first level of consumers, this is our first trophic level. That first trophic level is a self-feeding level, and that's our producers. After that, we're going to have a few consumers. Now, what does a consumer do? A consumer eat. So our first consumer, now primary means first. Now remember, when you went to school, you went to your first school, that was your primary school. So primary means first. So the first consumer is now going to be on our next level. So after our first level of self-feeders, we get our first level of consumers. So we're going to now say that this is actually our second trophic level. Now, I don't want you to get confused here. I hope I did not confuse you. Let me just explain this quickly. All right, producers is on our first trophic level. First trophic level, because they can make their own food. The consumers are on our second trophic level. The secondary consumers are on our third trophic level. Tertiary consumers are on our fourth trophic level. Okay, so we have first, second, third, fourth, fifth. Remember, we said the shorter the food chain, the better the energy value at each level. Okay, here's a beautiful food chain. Now we can see this in the picture. We can now add all those words that I have explained to you. Now let's look at our green plant. Okay, that's our green plant. Let's use green. Now remember, that is our first trophic level, which means that's our first feeding level. So that is the autotrophic plants, meaning that they can make their own food by photosynthesis. Then that, now remember, okay, that energy from the sun, never forget this. There's the sun, the radiant energy of the sun. The radiant energy of the sun is now converted into another form, and we're going to use that word chemical energy. That is our new form of energy, chemical energy. That energy is now, for example, inside the apple I was telling you about earlier on. So that radiant energy of the sun is converted into chemical energy that is now inside our plant, inside food, inside fruit, inside our vegetables. That is the energy of the sun in a different form. Now that energy is going to be passed on to the consumers. So this little worm then is our first consumer. Now first, remember I said primary school, so we're going to call this our primary consumer. Okay, so that's our first consumer. But which trophic level is that at? Okay, that's our first feeding level of self-feeders. The worm is on the second feeding level or trophic level. but they are primary consumers. Now, another term that you have to know here is that that little worm eats only plants. So what term do we use for that? Is the term herbivore. So the term herbivore apply to animals that eat plant material only. So this little worm is only going to feed on that plant. Now, that arrow, what does that arrow mean? Okay, the arrow goes from the plant to the worm. Now, learners tend to draw the arrow the other way, but that's incorrect because the arrow indicates the flow of energy. So when this little worm is going to eat the leaves, or like you are going to eat the apple, the energy flows from the plant to the little worm. That's why you are eating food, is to get the energy. Now, that little worm, you can see there, the little worm is wiggling and moving, using up some of this energy. So that's why we said this energy is lost. There's an energy transfer taking place, and energy gets lost from one level to the next. Okay? The next level is going to be the carnivore. Now, in this case, that little turtle is going to eat that worm. So what level of feeding, which trophic level are we at now? If we count, first trophic level, that's a second trophic level, so that's going to be our third trophic level. All right, now primary consumer. What will that worm be now? Primary, from primary school, you go to your next school, your second big school, so that's going to be the secondary high school that you're going to. So we're going to call that consumer a secondary, I'll have to fit it in there, a secondary consumer. All right, so the little turtle here eats the worm and gets energy, and that's why that arrow represents the flow of energy from the worm to the turtle. The turtle is going to walk and do all its own activities, using up some of that energy that it got from eating the worm. Right, we're now moving on to another trophic level. So we had the first trophic level, we had the second trophic level, third, and this is going to be a fourth trophic level. And this is a hawk or an eagle. I apologize. This is sorry. Okay, I must first write fourth trophic level. So it's an eagle. There it says an eagle. So here comes an eagle, and the eagle is going to catch that turtle. And the eagle is going to consume the turtle. So what's happening here again, the energy flows from the turtle to the hawk. Now this we can call, because it hunts and it kills its prey, what do we call an animal that does that? Yes, we call it also a predator. A predator. So predator is an animal that hunts and kills its prey. So it's going to hunt that turtle, kill it, and then eat it. Also, we can call the turtle and we can call the eagle a carnivore. I don't have more space here to write. Let's write it there. A carnivore. All these terms. I hope you're going to remember them all. Okay, so a carnivore is an animal that eats other animals. Or you can also say it's a meat eater. All right, so this you could also say it's my final consumer. That's the last consumer. Now look at this food chain. This food chain is it's not too long because we have 1, 2, 3 consumers. So it's a good food chain. There's a good flow of energy. I think there's enough energy at all the different levels. Now, what's going to happen if that eagle is going to eat the turtle and leave remains? Who is going to come and eat the remains? Now, we don't have it in this diagram, but we're going to call it a scavenger. A scavenger. For example, we're going to have a hyena coming to eat the remains. So the hyena will wait for the eagle to hunt and kill and eat the turtle, and then it will eat the remains. That is a scavenger. Right, now this is a food chain. So if I want to make a definition now of a food chain, what would I say a food chain is? A food chain, all right, is a relationship between living organisms, and it is the flow of energy from the producers to different consumers. All right, now as I said, this is the food web now, and if you look at the food web, what do you see on this food web? You see producers, you see a lot of consumers, so you see the interaction going on here with all the arrows. The producers are passing on energy, and energy is transferred from one producer to the next. All right, I think let's go for a quick ad break, and then we'll come back and do the detail of the food web. Right, grade 10s, welcome back from your short break. And like I said before the break, we are going to talk about food webs. Now, if you look at this food web, as I said, there are producers and there are lots of consumers with arrows that are pointing the flow of energy. Now, a food web is more complicated than a food chain, but it's also more stable, because what's going to happen is that because there's more food source, there's more food available at each level. If a food source runs out, there are other food sources for the animal to go and feed on. Now let's look at this food web, and we can actually break it down now into different food chains. Now let's isolate one food chain. All right, here's our green plant. Now if I have to draw a dotted line down like that, all right? Now that's our food chain. So that forms, our first producers, that is our first trophic level, which is our first feeding level. All right, the next, if I draw a dotted line down there, there's all our herbivores, and then those are all the carnivores. So that's our second trophic level, third trophic level, and so on. Now, the energy, let's isolate, like I said, a food chain. So we go like that from the tree to the goat, and the goat goes to the lion. So there is one food chain. Now, if I take another food chain, go from the producer to the rabbit, to the wildcat, and then to the lion. Can you see what's happening here? A food web is an interlinking of different food chains together. So it's not just one single food chain. So what is a food web? It's the linking together, or the interlinking of many food chains together. And like I said, this is more stable, so that if one organism gets isolated, or one organism becomes extinct, or one organism die out, that there are other organisms that the other consumers can actually eat. So the whole system will not collapse because of just that one organism. So this is a much more stable than a food chain, and this is what we will get in nature. Now from here we're going to move on to a food pyramid, and I did give you a brief outline of a food pyramid. I'm going to do a little bit more detail. Now, like I said, if you take your food chain and you reconstruct the food chain into a pyramid formation, now you're going to say, why a pyramid? Why can't I just do it like that? Why can't I just draw a block and then make my levels like that? I can do that. I can write plants there, and I can write my herbivores there, carnivores. So what's the point? What's the point of a triangle? The reason is the following. At the base of the pyramid, we have our producers, our plants. Now you can think for yourself already. What's happening here? It's showing, well, the whole pyramid is showing to a point. It's tapering to a point. That means a few things. First of all, it means that if you look at that kg, that means the kilograms is getting less. So in other words, the biomass. Biomass is the mass of living matter. So you measure that in kilograms. So look at our kilograms. From 1,000, it's getting 100, 10, 1. So it's showing that the biomass is getting less. It's also showing that the numbers are getting less. So we have a lot of producers, the herbivores are less in amount, and then the carnivores are getting less and less. But the most important thing, it's showing the flow of energy. So what's happening here? We were talking about energy is transferred from one level to the next level. And what happens to the energy? The energy is getting less. So from our producers, which contain the most energy, the energy is getting lost, and therefore the pyramid formation. Do you understand that now? Right, good. So let's look at our different levels. So this is trophic level 1. Remember trophic level 1? I'm just going to write here T1 for trophic level 1, which are all our green plants. All our producers are down here. They produce their own food. This level has got the most energy. Why? Because they get the energy from the sun. The next level, I'm just going to write T2. That's trophic level 2. Those are the herbivores, also known as primary I'm just going to put primary consumers because they are the first organisms to eat. Primary consumers, and herbivores mean that they eat the plant material. On the next level, which is T3, trophic or feeding level 3, we have once again, we've got carnivores, Herbivores eat plant material, carnivores eat other animals, or they eat meat, and therefore we call them carnivores. Primary carnivore just means that's the first carnivore in this chain. All right, and remember we have the secondary consumers, which is the second animals to eat in the food chain, and that brings us to the top carnivore. We can call it the final consumer, or we can call it the tertiary consumer, which means third. All right, that means third. I don't think I mentioned it when we did the food chain. Primary, then secondary, and then third or tertiary consumers. All right. Remember, we also call the lion, a predator because it's going to hunt and kill the animal before it can eat it. All right, now the tertiary consumer, like I said, is on the high level, on the highest level of this pyramid, and that is our top carnivore in this pyramid. Now, top carnivore means it's the last carnivore of this food chain, and that is in the T4 or trophic level 4. Now, to quickly summarize, we put a food chain in the formation of a pyramid. A pyramid can represent the biomass, as this one is representing in kilograms. We can do a pyramid of energy, and we can do a pyramid of numbers. That's all known as a food pyramid. All right, we're going to move on to now ecotourism. Now, ecotourism we can talk about ecotourism forever. I'm just going to touch onto a few benefits of ecotourism to South Africa, to our country, and how can you and I be a responsible ecotourist. Now, a few of the benefits. Let's just page down here. All right, let's look at benefits. What are the benefits to South Africa? Now, the first one, we benefit as a visitor, we benefit as locals, and our environment benefit. Now, the first thing is that it helps to alleviate poverty. Now, alleviate means that it will reduce poverty, or it can help to reduce poverty. So it alleviates poverty by bringing in money. So it brings money into the economy of South Africa, and it is creating jobs. So ecotourism create jobs. Right. For our environment, it helps to nurture. Nurture means we look after it, and we protect our natural resources. Natural resources. Now, those are just 3 benefits of ecotourism that is beneficial to our country. Now, how can you and I be a good tourist? In other words, what is our responsibilities when we go and visit another country, or when other people come visit our country? We call them responsible eco-tourists. Also going to just mention a few things. Now remember that many places, when you go to any place in the world, many places are protected areas. Like, for example, we spoke about this in our previous session, is if you go down to the Cape Province, we have our beautiful Cape Floral Kingdom in one of our largest biomes down in Africa, and we have to look after those flowers and every little organism in that area. Right, so we have to respect. We have to respect the area, all right? We have to respect that specific area, or any area that we go and visit. We have to respect the area, and we have to respect the people that live in that area. Now, by respecting those people, you need to learn a little bit. You need to learn a little bit about what? About the place that you're going to visit, so that you know about the do's and the don'ts of the place that you're going to visit. So you need to know about the culture. So you need to know about the whole culture of the country, so that you can, the culture diversity, and that's what I'm trying to get to, of that country. For example, the diversity of all our plants and animals, we call it the biodiversity of a country. So we have to learn about that and understand the differences that there are between the people living in that area. So it's all about respecting the place that you go and visit, the people that live there, and understand their cultural beliefs. Now, I have a motto, and my motto is, when you go and visit a place, is to take only pictures. Take only pictures and leave only footprints. So that's the motto to be a good eco-tourist in another country. But like I said, ecotourism is a whole topic on its own, and that is just a very brief explanation. That now brings us to a few questions. Right, let's test your knowledge. Now remember, in the previous session I was talking about multiple choice question. How do I go about to answer multiple choice question? And like I said, learners go and they say, oh, easy marks, and they go eeny, meeny, miny, mo maybe, and they make the wrong choice. So it's very important to understand the question, to read through all the possibilities, and then make your choice. And if you still don't have a choice, then you can start to eliminate the ones that don't fit, and then you'll get to the right answer, hopefully. Let's look at the first multiple choice. It says compare. That means you have to look at both. Compare this food chain. Okay, so we have algae, water fleas, catfish, green herons, which are big birds, and then trees, tent caterpillars, red-eyed vireos, which are like also a type of bird, and hawks. Right, both water fleas. Now that word both is important. Water fleas and tent caterpillars are, now think for yourself, carnivores. Now look where they lie in the food chain. If I change to green, all right, algae, that's my producer, and trees, that's my producer. So the next trophic level or feeding level is going to be the herbivores. So I know water fleas is a herbivore, tent caterpillars are also herbivores. So that first one is wrong. Primary consumer, I look at it, primary, the first ones to eat. So there's my choice. Aha, it's B. I don't even have to look, maybe you can just glance over C and D, but I think B is my correct answer. That was an easy one. Right, number 2, consider the components. Now what is a component? It's what makes up something. What does it consist of? Consider the components of a food chain. It must be feed or I think food maybe, of a food chain. Producers, herbivores, carnivores, top carnivores. Which level, all right, contains the most energy? Think now of your pyramid. Even before you even look at your possibilities, think of the pyramid. The broad base down is my producers. I know that. Look down my list. Aha. I don't even have to think about the others. Maybe you can just look at them, but I know it's producers. So the answer is A. Number 3. Which of the following contributes? That means, how is it involved? How does it contribute to the carbon cycle? Number A, respiration. Does it contribute to the carbon cycle? Yes, it does, because cellular respiration produces carbon dioxide. Does photosynthesis contribute? Yes, because it takes in carbon dioxide. Fossil fuel combustion, that means the burning of fossil fuels. Yes, it makes carbon dioxide. So all 3 of these are involved in the carbon cycle, whether it's good or not good. So all of these are correct. So that is number D. Right, number 4. A natural food web. Now it says, okay, a natural. So it's a food web that appears in nature naturally. Contains only grazing food chains. Okay, maybe. Contains several trophic levels. Now we have said that a food web is the interlinking of many food chains. So I would say that one sounds right so far. It's usually unstable. We said that food webs are stable, more stable than one single food chain. All of these. So that one, so it can't be D. So yes, I would say B is the correct one. All right, we move now on to number 5. How do plants contribute? So it's plants, not animals. How do plants contribute to the carbon cycle? When they respire. Now remember, plants can also respire, very little bit. They do release a little bit of carbon dioxide. Not much, but they do release carbon dioxide. All right? So they respire, they release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Do you think that's right? Maybe. All right? I would say it's a big baby. When they photosynthesize, they consume, that means they take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Definitely right. They do not contribute to the carbon cycle. No, that one is not fitting in anywhere. So both A and, oh yeah, there's my answer. A and B is correct. You were very tempted maybe to choose A or B, yeah, until you got to the last one and you saw, aha, it's A and B. Right. Oopsie. We still have a few more multiple choice questions. How do nitrogen-fixing bacteria? Now, this comes from the nitrogen in nitrogen cycle, where bacteria are involved, changing the nitrogen into ammonia, into nitrates, so that proteins can be made. Right. They return nitrogen, return nitrogen to the atmosphere. They don't do that, all right? They change ammonia to nitrate. Maybe they change nitrogen to ammonia. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with that one so far. But the last one, they withdraw nitrate from the soil. So it's between B and C. Now remember, this one is nitrogen-fixing bacteria that they're talking about, nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So that one is going to change the nitrogen to ammonia. So it's definitely number C, 1.6C. You see how you have to work through all of them, not just one or two, work through all of them and get to the right answer. Right, 1.7. In what way are decomposers like producers? Now, a decomposer is when dead plant and animal matter needs to be decayed and decomposed and returned back into the soil. And our decomposers are things like fungi and bacteria. Now remember, producers are plants. So another question is, in what way are they the same? Okay, it says now either one may be first member of a grazing food chain. We know that producers are only on the first link. on the first level. Both produce oxygen. No, decomposers can't produce oxygen. Both require a source of nutrient molecules and energy. Now remember, decomposers are living organisms, so they also need nutrients and energy to survive. The last one, so that one is more likely right. Both supply organic food for the biosphere. That one cannot be, because decomposers cannot supply food, so it's definitely number 1.73. I mean C, I apologize. Right, 1.8. How is a primary consumer? Now remember, that is our first consumer, like a secondary consumer. That means, in what way are they the same? Both pass on less energy to the next trophic level than they receive. That one to me sounds correct. Both pass on the same amount of energy. It can't be the same, because energy gets less. So every level the energy gets less, so it can't be the same. Both tend to be herbivores. We know that only primary consumers are herbivores. It can't be that one. Both are able to convert organic compounds to ATP. Now ATP is energy without the loss of energy. That's not true, because energy is lost. So we go back. Your first choice. And I think it's quite important to make little ticks and little crosses for yourself. Remember, you are allowed to write on your question paper. That is important. Right, 1.9. Which statements or statement, remember it's always one. You only have one. You can only choose one. Which statement is true concerning the following food chain? Grass, rabbits, snakes, hawks. Right. Each predator population has a greater biomass than its prey population. So that means that that means that predator has a greater value of energy or biomass than a rabbit. Number B, it says, each prey population has a greater biomass. So remember, biomass is the living mass. They measure that by actually weighing the living mass, and that's how they determine the biomass in kilograms. Okay, each population is omnivorous. Now, what's an omnivore? An omnivore eats both plant and animal material. So I'm sitting with between A and B, yeah? Okay, so number C is completely wrong. Both A and C are wrong. Now, it can't be number D, because my choice is between A and B. Now, I would say that the prey population has a greater biomass, because the prey population comes before the predator in the food chain. So that's a link before, or a level before the predator. So it's definitely number B. All right, so 1.10. It says now, add these trophic levels to this diagram representing a pyramid of energy. Now remember, pyramid of energy. Now you can see this tapering pointed end means that the energy is getting less. Right. Now, even before we're going to write it in here, we know that algae is our green plant. So algae will be first. So I'm just going to write A there. Okay, so we can put algae. This is what they want you to do. Now, algae is the producers. The producers always go on the bottom or the broader part of a pyramid. Now, what is going to eat that algae? If I look down my list, I don't think large fish, humans, yeah, we can eat algae, but before that, small fish. Now, what is zooplankton? All right, zooplankton are tiny little microscopic animals that live in water. So they are going to feed on the algae. So number B will be zooplankton. Okay, so we're going to write zooplankton into our next level. Now, what's going to eat the zooplankton? If I look down my list, I think small fish. So that will be number C. So we're going to write small fish into trophic level 3. Then small fish, I think large fish will eat the small fish. So there's going to be large fish. And lastly will be humans at the top of this food chain, and we are going to eat the large fish. All right, so there's our pyramid of energy showing from our producers to all our consumers, and it shows the flow of energy, and the energy is getting less at each level. I thank you, grade 10s. I think that's the end of my session. I hope to see you again in the next session, and good luck with your exam. I hope it all goes well. Thank you and goodbye.